Hi, I'm Brad Sanlands from Quality Insight and welcome to Inside Chat. Today I'm stuck in the world of PowerPoint, so I've got a great topic to talk about today, and that's fees and charges and suitability coming into care. But it's not designed just for someone looking for care, and certainly we'll get a lot of tips out of that as we go through this information sharing session. It's also extremely relevant for those that are looking to have a career in aged care in terms of selling aged care beds. You may also be a budding facility or general manager or care home manager that's looking for some extra tutelage around how aged care fees and charges work. So step with me as we go through this journey. I know I'm stuck in the PowerPoint bubble. I hate also being killed by PowerPoint, but I find it a really good way of departing that information where you can stop the video, you can jot down anything you've seen here. The numbers that we speak about today will change over the next years, months, whatever it is. So as we sit here today in late July 2024, these numbers are accurate, they're relevant, but they will change. I can't stress that enough. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you want notifications, ding the bell also there. We're here to help as much as we can, and producing these videos to help not only the community but the aged care admissions community in doing their job better. It's certainly great to know that these are making a difference in terms of how you do your work. So to get into what we're looking at here today, fees and charges in residential aged care. So RACF, we love using a lot of acronyms in this world of aged care. So it's a residential aged care facility is the RACF. So don't be confused by that. So why is occupancy important in an aged care home? So occupancy has been a massive challenge over the last few years from the point of view that there's been plenty of stock, not enough demand coming through. So in the last 4 or 5 years through Royal Commission and then running into COVID and then other things, occupancy across the country was sitting at about 82%. At any one time, there are 200,000 odd beds available in aged care. So 82% of them occupied, so it gives you a fairly good idea of what was vacant. Moving forward, however, since post-COVID, occupancy is flipping the other way around. The demand is outstripping the supply. And that's come about from a number of different reasons, but the main reason for that is the uncertainty in the marketplace. Providers just haven't been building anything. There's been the odd home built, and I think I read the other day there was a couple of hundred, maybe 500 beds on average coming online. The market needs much more than that to be viable moving into the future. It's well publicised that we have an ageing population, and we'll hit some staggering numbers of those people requiring aged care services, and that's all care services, so retirement living, home care and residential aged care. So it's not just one segment of it, but there'll be some extraordinary numbers of people requiring those services, and we don't have enough stock to supply that right now. So moving forward, it's going to be very relevant. So occupancy is a key hot topic for most care providers out there. It's also a fairly high fixed cost business, so having optimal occupancy in those care homes is vital for anyone. So anyone who's an admissions person moving forward, your life would have changed from really struggling to find the right person to come into care. Not a problem finding people to come into care. You're still got to have a problem finding the right person coming into your vacant bed. So it's really important that you understand what your resident profile and what your current situation for occupancy is. If you're seeking a care bed, the sooner you can have those conversations with a loved one, the better. If you are looking for a particular location, a particular provider you want to deal with, you need to get in early and start having those discussions earlier. Tour, get some sort of approval for placement, and your loved one may even need to move in a little bit earlier than they would like to, but that's what you're going to need to do now to get the right place that you want to be in. Attracting and onboarding residents is a key enabler of the business and the health community and aged care provider of choice. So if you have great processes of onboarding your resident mix, you'll have a great word of mouth going out there. So anyone in the admissions team, it's not just good enough to bring someone into care. You need to make sure you're onboarding your resident into that care home as best you can to give them the optimal experience. That includes the family. If you're a resident or a loved one looking for placement, really take note on how they onboard residents. Ask questions about how they onboard their residents coming into care. It's a vital aspect. There are so many misnomers or miscommunications that can take place, and it's not through any sinister sort of actions. It's purely because there's lots of information and you don't have a lot of time sometimes to dissect it all, take it all in, and then be able to disseminate it to other loved ones or other key stakeholders across your family group. So really make sure you check out what are the onboarding processes as you go through the care options. Just to go down to some numbers. So right now, as we sit here today, and this is information that was garnished off the Stuart Brown report, the ideal resident income coming in is at $409.20 per day. So that is, if you want to round it up to annual terms, 150 odd thousand a year it costs to be in residential aged care. Now, those costs aren't all borne on the resident or the resident family themselves, so don't stress that you have a $150,000 a year bill coming. The federal government will accommodate or will fund a majority of that, but there are some costs of care that you need to be aware of, and we'll break them down as we go through the video. But to really put it in perspective, it is an expensive pastime coming into residential aged care, and that's for a very good reason. There are a lot of very highly trained, highly technical. The buildings themselves are designed for residential aged care in most cases, particularly the new ones. So this is an industry that it's not a mum and dad type organisations going on. These are very professionally, highly skilled and highly trained businesses. So they do cost a bit of money to maintain where they need to be at. And you're dealing with a valuable, vulnerable population. So it's fair and right that there should be a cost associated. But if you're a care home provider, you're a facility manager listening to this, your ideal resident income, it should be at $409.20 a day. The flip side of that is there's expense, and they're expensive businesses to run. So again, looking at the Stuart Brown reports and taking off the averages around where stuff sits, there's $406.72 a day it costs to run these businesses. Now, some of that does include some depreciation costs, which you may typically sort of think that shouldn't be included there, but if these businesses don't reinvest in the maintenance and the ongoing improvement of these businesses, they'll never improve. So you do have to factor those in. So you can see there the profit margin at the end of the day is very slim, and that's why it's reported that the aged care industry is very much struggling. Aged care workers absolutely deserve every cent that they get as pay rises, but when these pay rises are gazetted and go through, there is an impact to something else. So if it's not funded and the aged care provider is expected to fund these things, you can see there that roughly $1,000 in profit per resident per year is not a lot of money left over for any sort of changes or influx of those sort of costs. So it's a highly expense-driven business. There's a lot of high overheads. There's not a lot of variability anymore in terms of what they can charge. The only wiggle room they've really got is around accommodation and additional service charges. Everything else is pretty much fixed. The ideal gazetted profit in the industry is at $16,000 per annum per bed. So that's where most aged care homes are aspiring to be. And if you're a business person out there and you're looking for a care home for a loved one, if you're making $16,000 per unit of profit per annum, you'll quickly realise that there's not a massive amount of profit in there. So that's why there hasn't been big investment moving forward. But if aged care providers are able to achieve that, they can certainly be reinvesting into their staff, training, how the resident experience is, all those things. Most good providers are doing that as a rule. I'm going to look at an example now. So when we look at aged care, and I do a lot of sales training with different people, we try to bring in real examples, or we try to bring in staged examples that are based off real. But if we look at someone like a Maud, so Maud's 85 years of age. Maud's had a recent fall at home. was found by a neighbour, has a daughter that lives in a state. Maud's been told by the doctor that she cannot go back home. There is no one there to care for her, and Maud does need to seek residential aged care. Maud's not in a good spot. So if you look at Maud's situation, she has very little time, or the daughter has very little time now to make decisions around care. Maud may have visited or may have an idea of what sort of aged care facility she would like to go into, but pretty much now is time to find somewhere, and time is precious and short when it comes to this sort of action. A fall at home may mean that Maud's been in hospital for 2 to 3 weeks. Once that hospital has deemed her ready for discharge, they'll be looking to put Maud into the next care option as quickly as possible. They used to have respite options that they could put Maud into in some sort of next level care. Those places are full. So Maud's options are, and should be addressed by the social worker, is find a residential aged care home and take the best option or the first option that you get. You do still have time to look for stuff, so don't necessarily take the first vacancy that pops up, but you're certainly got a lot less options, and you'll hear me talk a lot about that as we go through this presentation on this clip. The final thing there is just a little background on Maud. She owns a modest home, widowed for the last 13 years, and on a full pension with some savings. All that will make sense as I'm going through this presentation, but those little tidbits for those people that are admissions people, they're the bits you need to be listening to and reviewing, because they will help start to form a picture of Maud. You've got some clinical information, you're starting to garner some financial information, and getting a real idea of what Maud, as a resident coming in your care home, is about. You need to now personalise. You need to find out more about the personal information of Maud, so you can make some really good decisions about how do you bring her through that care journey. So prior to coming into residential aged care, Maud's going to be assessed on a few things. So first and foremost, Maud's going to be assessed whether or not she's eligible for residential aged care funding. So that is done through a process called an ACAR, and it's done by ACAT. Again, tons of acronyms, my apologies, but it's the industry we're in. So ACAR is the Aged Care Assessment Report, and the ACAT is the team that comes through and do it. So the Aged Care Assessment Team. I've said this on previous videos, but you can access the ACAT system via My Aged Care. You can call them, you can put a web inquiry. Hospital social workers teams also will be able to get support through ACAT, and care homes can get emergency ACATs. This is your passport, if you like, into coming into care. You need to have an ACAT because it will determine the level of funding that your loved one will receive. It will also determine what type of residential aged care entry your loved one is eligible for. So there'll be a couple of combinations. They'll either be eligible just for respite, they'll get eligibility for respite and permanent. It's really important that if someone is coming into aged care and they only have respite, that they're reassessed quickly so they get that permanent tick. It means a lot to the care home because it means they can actually be paid for the funding entitlements for Maud. And Maud has a smoother, less stressful entry into care. You're not being stuck in a hospital bed waiting for someone else to do something. So really important to take note of what that ACAR says when it comes through. You can enter into residential aged care as a self-funded resident, so that means you're not looking for the government to subsidise any costs at all. Usually this is reserved for those people that have a lot of means to support themselves, and we're talking about wealthy, more than $5-6 million worth of assets, plus some in the bank account, where you don't necessarily want to divulge what's going on because it's not going to mean anything from a funding mechanism. It's still worthwhile, however, to engage with a accredited financial advisor for aged care, just to test where that's at. I'm not giving any financial advice as we go through this. I'll stick strictly to facts. But when you are looking at what sort of assessment or entitlements or funding you deserve, you need to get advice from those people if you've got significant assets. It's the only way to do it, to be sure that you're following the rules properly and getting what you're entitled to, more importantly. Maud will be reviewed under clinical status. So once that ACAR comes through, they will have a load of information around the clinical and care of Maud, and what the care home needs to look at in terms of making the determination whether they can care for Maud. So once Maud comes through that, she'll eventually be classified under AN-ACC, is the new funding model for residential aged care. AN-ACC has 13 classifications. So AN-ACC stands for the Australian National Aged Care Classification. It has 13 sub-classifications in it, and Maud will fit into one of them based on the ACAR that comes through. This assessment generally takes place between day 4 to day 28 after entry into care. So the care home provider may not necessarily know what classification Maud is. They'll have an idea through their own mechanisms. They'll have a default category that Maud will come into funding under, but they won't be given the absolute tick of where she sits until post 28 days into care. Under those 13 classifications, what happens from that is there's a dollar amount of funding that Maud is entitled to in coming to care. That is paid directly to the care provider through Medicare. It's also a determination of what care minutes now need to be assigned for Maud in her daily living. So there'll be carers minutes and there'll be registered nurses minutes that are assigned under Maud's stay once she's classified under AN-ACC. These care minutes have been mandated recently, so 1st of October last year was when that became enacted in terms of the care minute profile. What it means for the care home is they have to maintain a minimum level of staffing all the way through, and this includes registered nursing staffing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If they cannot supply that, they have to apply for special dispensation through to the department, and or they need to get agency staff to come in and care for Maud. During those times, they cannot meet their obligations. Agency staff is not an ideal way for a provider to maintain that. Generally, these team members will come in and out. They're not really associated with the care home, but they do provide a service and they do provide some caring options for the care provider as they go through. Ideally, and this is where you're looking from a care home assessing, do you want to go into the care home point of view? What sort of agency levels do they have on, and how long has that been going on for? So it's a good question to ask when you come into a care home. Care providers won't like the question, but again, it's got to be transparent. You've got to be upfront and transparent with what goes on in the home, because it will alleviate any stress or concerns as you move forward. There's mandated care minutes and they're meeting that, but how are they meeting that is the real thing you've got to look at. What will take place is post that 28 days, that's not the only time there'll ever be an assessment in coming into AN-ACC. They use a number of different tools in getting to the level. Post-admission, if a behavioural change takes place or a condition change takes place, the care home can apply for a reassessment under AN-ACC, and they can be reassessed 12 months after stay as well in some instances. There are some classifications where that reclassification or the reassessment can take place earlier, but quite typically the ordering of a reclassification will take place 12 months post-entry into aged care. It is very relevant this time to remind you that if your loved one has a reclassification, which means their level goes up, which means their entitlements go up in terms of funding, and you're paying a means tested care fee, you may see an increase to your bill based around this reclassification. So that's sometimes where you can have that classifications, but I'll discuss a lot more around what means tested care fee is quite soon. We get to financial status. So the next piece that Maud will be assessed on is around her financial status. So the financial status is determined through an asset and income form that's uploaded. So it's referred to as the SA 457. This form is lodged to Services Australia, and they will send back an outcome letter and classify where you're at. You'll be classified into one of three categories, and I'll go through that shortly as we go through this video. But essentially, once that's lodged, that's the assessment. It can only be changed by lodging a new updated form. And again, can't stress enough that if you are with an accredited aged care financial advisor and you have some means and you're paying the means tested care fee, you need to relodge your current asset and income at least 6 monthly. This could mean that you could maximise your entitlements and reduce your costs in care. So really important to make sure you're across that as well. Residents who've been on full pension for some time and don't own any significant assets, they may not be required to fill in this SA 457 because the department will already have your details and already be able to issue an outcome letter, which is typically a fully supported or a low means or a concessional resident. So it takes a bit of burden off you for having to do that if you don't have those means to outline. All Australians can afford residential aged care. The federal government will fund you under different classifications. What they are doing though is if you can afford to co-contribute to your care, you'll be asked to. So it's like everything else that's going on around us. If you can afford to pay something, you'll be asked to pay something. If you can't afford to pay anything, you won't be required to pay anything. It just may change your choices and options is the only thing. If you are coming in as a fully supported resident into care and you're looking for an ideal location, you may not have the choice to go into that, and I'll explain that further as we go through. Again, I reiterate, aged care financial advisors, they've got to be accredited under aged care. If you have assets over 100K, it is well worth your time and effort to engage these services. It will cost you some money, but the savings will be far greater than what it's cost you. So can't stress enough to engage these people as much as you can prior to coming into care. They're a wealth of information and they can also explain these fees and charges quite quickly. Home suitability. So the next thing to consider when I'm looking at Maud and can this care home provide health and well-being for Maud, there's a couple of things that I want to consider in terms of decision making. Ethnicity. Is this important to you? So if mum is first generation Australian, come from a different background, does she want to mix with people of her own ethnicity? As people decline in their cognitive abilities, they will regress back to childhood type tendencies. So if they spoke Italian in their home and English is their second language, and they have some cognitive decline, you will see them speaking more Italian and less English. It's just part of that disease. It's not relevant for everyone. So I know there'll be people out there howling at me not to bring out falsehoods, but I have seen it firsthand where residents have come into care, they've spoken English to me as they've had their stay. That's declined. It's more of their ethnic languages coming out. And it's sometimes an advantage to have people surrounding them that speak the same language. So that's what I'm getting at. If you have someone that wants a specific ethnicity, My Aged Care will identify ethnicities or what you're looking for there. Most care providers will also outline if they cater to specific cultural backgrounds, ethnicities, religion, etc. So if that's important to you, make sure that's part of your wish list. Location is generally number 1 or 2 on everyone's list. If you're intending to visit your loved one quite regularly, last thing you want to do is drive 20-30 minutes further than you have to. So I will, however, put a caveat on it that supply is quite short in a lot of good care homes. You may need to go onto a waiting list early. I've explained this in past videos. But if your location is really important to you, you need to make sure that you're booking those, booking yourself in quite quickly to those areas you want to be in. Food can be very important to most people. A couple of questions I'd ask around the food piece, and it's good for admissions team to explain food because sometimes it gets glossed over. They just point to the dining room and there it is. Food is very important for people from a cultural sense. It's an enjoyable thing. It's a mental health thing too for some people. So a couple of questions around food. Is it prepared on site? Are there catering organisations that are bringing the food in? They're all relevant questions to ask. The catering companies that bring some food in could be quite good. The food created on site could be quite good. But just ask people or ask the care providers, what do they do? If you're a care provider, explain what you do. It is so vital to people. Social needs. How is the lifestyle program? What is the lifestyle program? What are you doing to get residents up and about and engaging and socialising and really looking after their health and well-being. And then how are you tracking, communicating that? So it's really important if you're a admissions person to take the time to explain what happens in a lifestyle program. I've been on mystery tours where they're so underdone. People say they've got a program, they'll give you a calendar, they'll tell you to read the calendar when you go home, and that's it. There's such a vital aspect of what we do in aged care. Additional services, can the resident choose to pay for additional services to enhance their time? Some people want to pay extra services so they can enjoy what they were doing previously. So let's make sure that we're not cobbling people and stopping them from being able to do that. Let's make sure we explain that properly. If you're coming into aged care, ask about what the program's about, what's the advantages out of the program for your loved one. Don't look at it from an economics point of view. Look at it from a how is this engagement or enhanced lifestyle going to take place. It's so vital for the loved one coming into care. And the last piece here is what's the accommodation type. So if we've got a loved one and they want a shared room and ensuite, and all that's available to me is a shared room, I may need to take that option. So if I'm looking for the single room ensuite, I've only got the shared room available to me. I may need to either compromise or look for alternative placement. That's where you're at right now with the level of occupancy across, particularly in Queensland, South Australia, WA, New South Wales to an extent. Victoria's got a little bit of wiggle room, but not a lot. Occupancy rates across the country are really starting to increase. So if you are looking for a specific accommodation type, again, you may need to spread your net further in terms of where you're looking at. But make sure you discuss that with your loved one prior to coming into care. They may be quite comfortable in being in a shared room because they've been socially isolated for a number of years, and to have a friend next to them is vital. I have said in videos before, I've got numerous examples where people have come in, strangers, gone into a shared room environment, best mates through their last chapter of their book. Really special times. I've seen it work the other way as well. So the care home really needs to make sure they match people the right way when they come into that situation. Now, let's get to how the fees work. So Maud's got me here. I hope she looks after me as we go through this. But it's really important to articulate in any sense. So if you are an admissions person and you're talking to someone about coming into care or you're looking to come into care, all fees and charges are articulated as a daily fee. It's the way the government explain their fees and charges under their bulletins and under My Aged Care. It's how they articulate the funding fees that come back. So AN-ACC is represented in their categories as a daily amount. So all aged care homes will articulate their fees and charges as a daily amount. So it's part of what the industry does. You can certainly add it all up and put it as a monthly. Your invoices will come out as a monthly rolled up of those daily amounts. But when you look at the fees and charges that come through, they'll always be articulated to you as a daily fee. So something to be to take note of. When we're looking at the fees coming in or the costs coming in into care, so the cost that all consumers will pay coming into residential aged care is the basic daily fee. So as it sits today, and we're talking late July 2024, the basic daily fee is at $61.98 or $96 per day. So all residents will pay this cost. This isn't one of those costs that you get subsidised by the government. You may be coming in as a fully supported resident into care. The fully supported only is on accommodation and care, not the basic daily fee. So the basic daily fee is based on 85% of single aged care pension, and it does change. So in March and September of each year, that figure will change in line with pension. So if pension goes up, that fee will go up. If pension ever came down, heaven forbid, that fee would come down. So it's a good indication around March and September you will see those fees change, and that will impact upon your invoices, your monthly invoices. What the basic daily fee is, it covers your costs of daily living. So food, housekeeping, utilities, and some of the consumables of care will cover off. It's really important to note that under that basic daily living fee that comes through, when looking at how that all's broken down, the aged care home, some of them will divulge of where the breakup's at. You can get that information pretty freely off some free websites as well. Aged care homes will also look at benchmarking. So I mentioned before the Stewart Brown report. If you're an admissions person and you want to get a good understanding of the breakdown, and your care home subscribes to that, it's a good report to dive into to have a look about how these costs are broken down and articulated. And I'll show you in this visual fairly soon that as the basic daily fee is $61.96, it doesn't necessarily cover all the costs that are associated in the care. So really important to take note of that. When articulating this, don't just tell a resident coming into care they're going to pay $61.96 and leave it at that. You've got to explain what it's for. It covers the food, covers the housekeeping, it covers the utilities, the maintenance, and some consumables of care. There's a real tag as to what it's covering off. The next cost you can experience or expect is clinical costs. So before everyone shouts me down again, there is some clinical costs that people will face. So said before, the current residential aged care funding model is ENAC. The categorisation piece that takes place, I've explained that already. It is typical for some residents to co-contribute to their care costs. So that fee is called a means tested care fee. So what will happen in your assessment when you submit your SA 457, it will come back and it will determine a level of means. Under that level of means, it will also determine what your co-contribution to care should be. And that could be represented from $1 all the way up to above $350, $400, depending on the highest level of ENAC. If your loved one is categorised as a ENAC 13, and the ENAC 13 for the point of this exercise is $400, and you have significant means, you may be required to pay a means tested care fee of $400. That care fee is to co-contribute to care. Means tested care fee has some annual and lifetime caps, which will mean that you're not paying it forever. So eventually you'll be fully supported by the government once you reach those caps. But they do have caps. So what will happen if you're on the maximum entitlement, the $400 a day means tested care fee? The annual cap at the moment is around $33,000. Once you've hit $33,000 in that year, you will be fully supported by the government. The anniversary of the date of entry coming into care, that means tested care fee will kick back in again until you hit the lifetime cap, which is around $79,000 as we sit here today, late July 2024. So really important to take note around those things, because you'll get bill shock or invoice shock on the anniversary of the first year coming to care. All of a sudden you're now paying $400 a day more. It's all to do with your clinical care assessment. The other thing to take note when coming to care, and it is forgotten sometimes when admissions people are talking to people coming to care, you may have medication costs. These are not covered under the funding mechanisms that are currently available. So if you have small or significant medication costs associated with your care and health and well-being, you will be paying for them out of pocket, and that will be generally done by the home pharmacy, or you may have your own pharmacy. It really does depend on the rules of the provider you're coming into. Some providers will pretty much insist that you use their pharmacy for the ease of their own processes and systems, but sometimes you can have your own pharmacy as well. But I would recommend over all the admissions that I've seen come through, you are best to take on the home's pharmacy and get that right. The next piece is accommodation. So accommodation is one of those big things that really does create some confusion and some angst for admissions people coming to care. So costs are based on means testing, as we said before. You'll be classified into one of three categories. So the first category is low means, could also be fully supported, could also be concessional, tons of different words for it, but basically you have assets and income under a certain amount. So it's around $55,000, $56,000 as we sit here today. The next categorization will be moderate means. So This means the federal government will partially cover your accommodation costs. And that really is determined by what level of refurbishment the home has taken place. And I'll go through that as we go through this presentation. The third category is high means. So the resident pays for their accommodation costs. And it's based on the advertised room rate that the care home has. And whilst they have an advertised room rate, you'll only pay based on the agreed room rate in your contract. So they may have an advertised room rate of $850,000 for that room. You may have negotiated for that to be $800,000. That's what you'll pay, the agreed room price. Discounting is one of those things that's purely one-on-one negotiation. Was pretty relevant years ago, now not so much. So it doesn't hurt to ask if you are someone seeking care. If you're an admissions person and you have high occupancy, you may not necessarily need to offer any sort of discounts to come into care. But whatever you agree on, that's the room price that people pay for. So, additional services is the last cost of care for someone out of their own pocket. Additional services typically are services that need to be higher than what is considered under the Care and Services Act. So they can't be just paying for extra continental breakfast. That's considered under Care and Services. It needs to be significantly better than that for it to qualify under the additional services regime. There must be derived benefit and access. So what I mean by that is derived benefit. There should be benefit for the resident in having this service, and it should be ongoing, transparent, and something that you look at and it passes the pub test. It's got to meet all those criteria. They've also got to be able to have access to it. So you might have an additional service component that calls for hairdressing services. If you don't have any hairdressers or hairdressing services in the home, there's no access. They shouldn't be charged that fee. So again, when you're looking at additional service programs as someone coming into care, ask the questions about what does all of it mean. If you're selling those additional services coming into care, make sure you're explaining thoroughly how someone gets the access point and that there's a derived benefit test that goes with it. It's really important for that. Explained before, these services need to be substantially better than what's available to the resident. Won't go into any further detail on that. And services must be itemised on the contract or via the monthly invoicing. So this was sent down as a directive in June 23. But basically the transparency piece, you can no longer just say you got a bundle and it's $30. At some point you have to explain what that bundle is, what's the individual services, and itemise that. It's really important for that transparency piece for the resident and residents' loved ones to understand what they're paying for. And the charge by the care home can be varied. So it's not unusual for you to go to 3 providers and they all have different additional service charges. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's not one gazetted price. Care homes are entitled to charge what they believe they can for these services. So there's no standard rule over all of it. It just needs to meet those other criteria explained before. Typical costs in care. So again, this is a video designed to go for both those seeking care and those selling care services. So when you look at the building blocks that we've created here in the visual, you can see that indirect care costs are higher than what basic daily fee is. Indirect care cost does include administration tasks, which do need to be covered off. Direct care is a reflection on the care minutes mandated that has to take place and other obligations from providers. There's a ton of paperwork that also goes in the background for transparency for care and services. So that's got to be paid for somewhere. So that's included under that. Accommodation includes a depreciation cost in there. There's no bank of depreciation that anyone pays for, as a previous boss said to me. But depreciation is a vital aspect in terms of keeping these buildings modern and keeping them functional for today's resident coming through the door. So it should be articulated. And additional services is really just an estimation of the costs associated with a $35 a day program. As you can see, that doesn't leave a lot of money left over at the top. So $409 a day versus costs of $406 a day, just under $3 a day profit. There's not a lot of wiggle room for providers. So to maximise their benefits, if you like, they need to look at good additional service programs that deliver really good value but deliver reasonable profit margins, and they need to make sure they've got efficiencies in everything they do. So systems, most aged care homes have invested millions into improving efficiencies across how they do business. So that's all very relevant to the care and well-being of residents. Going through now more in the fees and charges piece. So just to really break down the high means, moderate means and low means. So high means, these are assets at this stage over $201,000. So again, July 24, we have these costs in place. In 6 months' time, these costs or these levels change. So if this video has been watched in a year's time, the costs will be very different, and you need to go through to the fees and charges advices to make sure you've got the right information. Accommodation can be based on advertised room price, as I've said before. When you're coming into care, you have options to pay for your accommodation as a high means. You can pay as a lump sum, so that's known as a RAD, or a refundable accommodation deposit, or you can pay a DAP, a daily accommodation payment. What it basically means is a RAD is a fully refundable, except if you have any charges you want to draw down, but that's agreed to by both parties. It's government guaranteed, but basically what happens is you'll pay a lump sum as a RAD into care. That may mean if you pay the full advertised room or the agreed room price, that will mean you will have no further accommodation daily costs. If you pay a part RAD and part DAP, you may have some daily accommodation costs as you go through your stay journey. And if you pay no RAD at all, you will have a daily charge coming through. The benefit to the RAD in terms of fact is that it will stop a daily charge. And the daily charge is based off an interest rate. That interest rate is referred to as a maximum permissible interest rate, and currently it's around 8.36%. That interest rate changes as our interest rate changes, no different to home loans or mortgage rates. But what you will find from that is once you come into care under a interest rate, you will stay at that interest rate as per the contract. It doesn't then fluctuate or change during your stay. The disadvantage of a DAP over the RAD is obviously that daily cost. So if you've got a means to pay a RAD, it's a big advantage to stop that daily bill. If that asset is determined by an aged care accredited financial advisor to be more valuable than paying the DAP, and that's the advice you're given, then that's fine. Some care homes have policy around paying a RAD versus just paying DAP. So it's really vital that you make sure you establish which way do they lean in terms of their policies or entry requirements as you come into care. The resident can opt to obviously pay a combination. You can change your mind too. So as you go along your care journey and you're paying a DAP, you might get 6 months in. You may then decide that you want to pay a RAD lump sum to remove that daily or that monthly invoicing of daily accommodation charges. That's more than fine. Again, some companies have policies around this. When you're talking to them upon entry coming to care, ask those questions. It's something that people seem to forget about or gloss over, but ask those questions. Can you change your payment piece as you're moving forward, particularly for accommodation? You also have sometimes the option to have paid your lump sum of RAD. It may have paid for the entire room, and then you want all fees and charges to come out of the RAD. You've got to keep in mind that as soon as the RAD starts getting eaten into, you'll start accruing a DAP, and that daily accommodation payment obviously will reduce that RAD quicker as you go through. But that sometimes is an option, and a very good option for some people, particularly if they've got a large asset that they're putting in place. I won't go into the wheres and wherefores about how do you pay for a RAD. That's strictly aged care financial advice. If someone is giving you advice around selling a house to pay for a RAD, that's strictly a no-no. What we can talk about are the facts. This is how a RAD works, how you pay for the RAD or pay for a DAP or choose to pay for either or is up to you and the advice that you're given when coming into care. If you're an admissions person going through that process, stick to the facts. Don't go to what you heard is maybe the right thing for somebody to do. I've heard it time and time again when people have said, you've got a RAD. Sometimes people sell their house to pay for a RAD. Yes, they do, but you don't know the individual circumstances of each person or that person you're talking to, and that may be the wrong advice for them. So always go through the option of going through an accredited aged care financial advisor. The other piece is moderate means. So you've had your high means, now we'll look at the moderate means. Moderate means are generally people that have been assessed between 59,500 or up to 201,000. There are things an aged care financial advisor can do to minimise costs and maximise entitlements with moderate and high means people. But again, if you are classified in a moderate means category, you are certainly going to get benefit from engaging services from these providers. If you're an aged care provider explaining how a moderate means resident works, it's very difficult until you get back the classification. So what I tend to do is explain what the category is if I believe that person is going to be in that area. If I don't believe that, looking at the asset and income, that someone is going to be in a moderate means classification, I'll generally just talk about high means and low means residents. But for moderate means, the accommodation charges is based on the care home's refurbishment status. So it might be a significantly refurbed home, which means you might be paying a little bit higher in your co-contribution. So you've got to keep in mind, this is a co-contribution for the accommodation charges under moderate means. You can choose to pay a lump sum as a moderate means resident. This is referred to as a RAC, or refundable accommodation contribution. Works the same as a RAD. It's fully refundable. It's guaranteed. You're paying a lump sum to reduce daily costs, basically. If you decide not to pay a RAC and you pay what's called a DAC, so a daily accommodation contribution, similar to a DAP for a RAD payer, you're paying rent basically on the room, but you're co-contributing to that. The federal government will co-contribute to those costs. The federal government won't co-contribute for a RAC. If you put up 100 grand, they're not putting up 100 grand. All you're doing is reducing your obligation of costs on that room. On your obligation, I must reiterate. The government will always have their subsidy piece. Whatever you're paying comes off your side of the ledger. Finally, a resident can do either or. So you can opt for a combination RAC DAC. So if you have $50,000 of a lump sum and you've been recommended that you should put that in to reduce your obligation of daily costs, great, you can do that. You can have that as an option. You can again change your mind during the stay. You may come into money. You might have $100,000 that has come into your lap. You can put that as a lump sum to help reduce those costs coming into care. And it's fully refundable upon discharge. So same with the RAD. A RAC is fully refundable upon discharge. And that means that if you decide to exit a care home facility to seek an alternative, and I've said some people go home because they've become well enough, that's fully refundable. And there are set criteria on how quickly a care home has to pay that back. And there are some interest penalties if they don't. So make sure you ask those questions around that. If you're an admissions person, make sure you understand what those obligations are about in terms of how people get paid back that RAD or RAC. Residents of low means or fully supported, don't have the category on here, but you have no accommodation costs. The government are fully subsidising those costs coming into care. So there's no obligation for you to pay anything under accommodation. The final piece I want to look at here, and I've spoken for quite a period of time, but the final piece here is to really look at when you're not suitable for a care home. So it's a question that comes up a bit, and these are some of the reasons that may take place. So if I look back at the three classifications I looked at earlier of clinical assessment, financial assessment, and home suitability, you may be not eligible for that care home under any one of those categories. So if I run through them really quickly, on the clinical assessment, what it really means is when they're clinically assessing, the care home may not feel they can safely care for the resident in their opinion. And this could be that the ailment or the level of care is too high or too low for the capability of the care staff. So let me explain the high-low thing. So if you come into care and there are some significant complex clinical conditions that your loved one has, or the resident that you're reviewing has coming in, they may be deemed as actually too complicated for that care home to safely be able to deliver. And that's a right thing to do. If the care home has for argument's sake, the resident has a tracheostomy, there's not a lot of options for self-cleaning, and there are some other ailments that go along with that, could be some behaviours, etc. The care home may not have the appropriate staff to be able to care for that person in terms of training, experience, the whole lot. So care homes are not acute sectors, like a hospital setting where that training is done every day. It's something that the care home would have to bring in skilled people to do prior to bringing that person in, or might be just deemed too risky. For low care, the person might be deemed to just not really require care at all. They might be quite mobile, independent, wanting to leave the care home each day. They might cause a massive disruption to the flow and balance of the care home. We are still seeing lockdowns in care. And when I talk about lockdowns, wings or different areas locked down due to COVID or influenza outbreaks, gastro outbreaks, they've been around forever and a day. It's not just a COVID thing. Having someone who's highly mobile and independent and wanting to leave every day, it can really affect them if they're part of any sort of lockdown. So if they're too low of a care, they may not also be eligible for that care home. The care home may be already capacity for a certain ailment. So the resident might present as bariatric. There might be several bariatric residents already in the care home. It's a heavy workload on certain areas of the care home. If there's too many bariatric, there might not be a place for that person coming in. So again, that might be why there's a non-approval of that person. So what can be done? Sometimes the ACAT or the ACAR that's come through is not reflective of the current condition of the person. It could have been done years ago, and it doesn't reflect the true clinical assessment of where that person's at now. So I've got an example where someone might have been high behaviours years ago. Now they're a lot less mobile or immobile in a bed for the majority of their time. That care home may reflect on that and then deem that they're able to support that resident in care. So it's really important to make sure you've got up-to-date information. You can also present further information. So if the ACAR is suggesting there's a high level of behaviours and that's potentially what's knocking it back, but your loved one's been in hospital, getting the social work team to talk to the care home about what their current observations are is really important as well. If the care home cannot look after a loved one because of behaviours and they are extreme, it's really the call of them in the safety for not only that resident, but there's other residents within the care home as well. So that needs to be respected under that decision. From a financial point of view, look, this is where the commercial aspect piece does come in sometimes, but a care home will review under a couple of different mechanisms. So one is the care classification. Spoke about ENAC before. It might be a care home that has a high frailty within the home. So there's a high level of ENAC, which means they've got a high number of care minutes. They may not be able to take on another high frail resident. That means they need to recruit more staffing and to cover that off. They may not have the capacity to be able to do that. Vice versa on that too. They may not have, from a low care point of view, they just might not have the staffing levels to help accommodate it, particularly regionally. They're experiencing some of these problems. And yes, agency can help bolster some of that, but sometimes agency is not even available to help cater for those situations. The other piece also is financial status. Care homes are required to have a certain number of fully supported or concessional residents. In fact, they're incentivised to have a 40% concessional ratio. This isn't relevant for all homes. Some care homes are quite happy to maintain their minimum levels, which generally sits between 17 to 20%. But typically, if they're under that category there, they've got a high level. High means people coming through, and they don't operationally need that incentivised funding. Other care homes rely on the 40% concessional occupancy. So yeah, that financial status unfortunately can determine whether some people come into care or don't come into care. It may also be a determining factor of what bed type or accommodation type that person is eligible for in that care home. So a low means resident may only be eligible for a certain category of room type with some providers. And unfortunately, yes, again, that's part of what potentially goes on in policy making when it comes to occupancy. There are some things that you can challenge around that, but essentially you've got to make sure you're looking at what options you've got, what choices you've got, and have an open mind to maybe looking further afield to get the right room type or care type that you're looking for. Home suitability, spoke about it quite extensively before, but it might be a resident mix piece that you're rejected under a home suitability piece. There might be a high level of females in a care home, bringing in additional males that have aggressive tendencies may not be right for that area, so that that particular resident may not be accepted in that area. It could be a share type, so a female share bed and the applicant is a male. They're not going to be sharing rooms in a care home the way it is. They won't even have shared bathrooms with male female unless they're known to each other. So that could be a reason for a non-approval. Behaviours. So you might have a resident that normally behaviours can be managed by that care home. They might have a large number of residents with similar high behaviours that they don't want to bring another person on. That could be another reason for rejection of an application coming into care. But again, it's all about making sure you present the right information and additional information if needed to help support that resident to come into care or provide alternatives for that person as well. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, if a person with high behaviours cannot stay home any longer, we've got a carer under stress, we've got a hospital network under pressure. As an industry, we need to look at where do we provide an alternative for them. So that care home type can be quite relevant. Look, thank you for stepping through with me on this. I hope you find it relevant. It's quite a lengthy video. You should be able to break it up into different sections. But we really try to explain what that fees and charges structure is and what to look for if you're an admissions person or a facility manager selling rooms in your facility, or what to look for if you're seeking residential aged care as well. Thank you. Again, if you liked this video, please like and subscribe. It really does help out. Add comments if you need to around what else you'd like to see or any questions you've got. More than happy to answer them. Thanks again and take care.